Hello and welcome to Insomniac Dose. You're welcome to comment your city and the time below. I always enjoy reading them. If you find these stories interesting, please consider subscribing. Let's start tonight's story. I need to be clear about something from the start. My family didn't warn me about the lodge because they were superstitious or paranoid. They didn't warn me because they knew I wouldn't listen, and in hindsight, they were absolutely right. The Hartwell Lodge sits about 40 miles northwest of Traverse City, deep enough into the Michigan wilderness that most GPS systems give up halfway there. My great-grandfather built it in 1947, back when hunting camps were meant to be crude and functional. Over the decades, it became something more. Additions were made, a generator installed, a proper well dug. By the time I was born, it could have passed for a modest vacation home, if vacation homes were typically surrounded by 70,000 acres of unbroken forest. We owned it outright. No mortgage, no property disputes, just a small tax bill every year that someone in the family quietly paid. But here's the thing. Nobody ever stayed there. Not for holidays, not for hunting season, not even for a single night. My Uncle Mark kept tools in the shed. My Aunt Carol stored some old furniture in one of the back rooms. But stay overnight? Sleep under that roof? Never. I asked about it once when I was 16. My father and I were driving back from a camping trip, and I mentioned how strange it seemed that we had this perfectly good property just sitting empty. He was quiet for a long time, hands tight on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road. Finally, he said, "We just don't, Danny. That's all there is to it." When I pressed, he added, "Some places aren't meant to be lived in. The lodge is one of them." That should have been enough. For years it was. Then I lost my job, then my apartment. Then, in a moment of spectacular stupidity during a family dinner, I suggested selling the lodge to cover some debts. The reaction was immediate and visceral. My father stood up from the table, my mother went pale. Uncle Mark actually laughed, not out of humor, but something closer to panic. "You don't sell it," Mark said, voice low. "You don't even joke about that." "Why the hell not?" I shot back, angry and desperate and tired of cryptic non-answers. Nobody responded. They just looked at each other with that shared understanding families develop over generations, the kind that excludes you completely. I left that dinner furious, and 2 days later I packed my car and drove north. If they wouldn't explain, I'd figure it out myself. And if the lodge was sitting empty anyway, I'd stay there until I got back on my feet. Call it spite, call it stubbornness, call it whatever you want. I was done being kept in the dark. The drive took 4 hours. The last 90 minutes on progressively narrower roads until I was on something that barely qualified as a dirt track. My cell signal died around mile 30. The trees pressed closer with every turn. Dense stands of pine and birch that seemed to lean inward, blocking out the late afternoon sun. When I finally reached the lodge, I sat in the car for a full 5 minutes just looking. It was exactly as I remembered from childhood visits. Never overnight visits, just brief afternoon stops to drop something off or pick something up. 2 stories, dark wood siding weathered to gray. A stone chimney rising from the center. The windows were intact, shutters closed but not broken. The porch steps didn't sag. Architecturally, it was sound, but the silence was wrong. I'm not talking about peaceful quiet. I grew up camping. I know what wilderness sounds like. Birds call, branches creak, small animals rustle through the underbrush. The forest has a rhythm, a constant low-level noise that becomes soothing once you adjust to it. Here, there was nothing. No birds, no insects, no wind despite the trees swaying slightly. The air felt thick, humid, like breathing through damp cloth. I forced myself out of the car, The property clearing was roughly circular, maybe 60 feet across, with the lodge in the center. Beyond that, the forest resumed in an unbroken wall of green and shadow. As I unloaded my supplies, I noticed something odd. Animal tracks everywhere in the clearing. Deer, raccoon, what looked like coyote. But none of them crossed the invisible line where the trees began. They paced along the perimeter, circled, doubled back, but never entered the woods. I told myself it was a scent marker thing. Territorial boundaries. Something logical. The front door was locked, but I had the key. My grandfather's original, heavy and iron, the kind that felt like it belonged in a Gothic novel. It turned smoothly and the door swung inward without a sound. The inside smelled like old wood and dust, but not decay, not abandonment. The furniture was covered with sheets, but beneath them everything was arranged carefully, deliberately. The kitchen was clean, the stone fireplace was swept. Someone had maintained this place, at least minimally, even if no one stayed. I walked through each room slowly, flipping on lights as I went. The generator kicked in from the shed outside, chugging reliably. Everything worked. Everything was fine. Except, in the main room, there were clean rectangles on the walls where picture frames had hung. I remembered those photos from childhood. Old hunting pictures, family portraits, my great-grandfather standing over a massive buck. Now they were gone, leaving only the ghost outlines in accumulated dust. Not stolen. Removed deliberately, taken down and stored somewhere, or destroyed. I checked every closet, every drawer. No photos, no family records, nothing personal at all. And no rules, no warnings, no helpful laminated list of instructions. Just an empty, waiting house. I made dinner from canned goods I'd brought, boiled water on the old gas stove, and tried to convince myself this was fine. A free place to stay while I figured out my next move. The family's weird avoidance was just old trauma. Some accident decades ago they'd never processed properly. As the sun set, I closed the shutters on every window. Not because I was afraid, but because the darkness outside felt like it was pressing against the glass, looking for a way in. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I made up the bed in the downstairs bedroom, the one my grandfather had used. I left a lamp on, pulled a book from my bag, and tried to read. Outside, the silence continued. No owls, no night birds, nothing. Around midnight, that changed. I heard wind, not natural wind, but deliberate rhythmic wind like breathing. Long inhalations that made the walls creak, followed by slow exhalations that rattled the shutters. Then I heard the footsteps, slow, measured, circling the lodge, not running, not stumbling, walking with purpose, pacing the perimeter, testing. I sat up in bed, holding my breath, listening. The footsteps completed one full circuit, then another, then a third, each time moving slightly closer to the walls, and then just outside my window, inches from where I sat frozen, whispering. Low, conversational, almost friendly. Multiple voices overlapping, speaking too quietly to understand but clearly forming words. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The whispering stopped. The footsteps moved on. By dawn, I was still awake, staring at the ceiling, telling myself that isolation plays tricks on the mind. Those old houses make noise. That wind through trees can sound like voices if you're tired enough and scared enough. But I didn't believe it. And when I finally built up the courage to open the front door and look outside, I saw the footprints, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, pressed into the soft earth around the lodge. Bare feet, human-sized, leading up to the walls, stopping inches from the wood, then simply disappearing. No tracks leading away, no explanation. Just evidence that something had circled the lodge all night, patient and deliberate, testing its boundaries. I stood on the porch in the cold morning air and understood, finally, why my family never stayed. But by then, of course, it was too late to leave. I spent that first morning trying to rationalize the footprints. I photographed them from every angle, measured them, and looked for signs of tampering or staging. They were uniform, adult-sized, bare, pressed about half an inch into the soil. Real weight, real pressure. Too many to count, overlapping in places, creating a trampled ring around the entire lodge. The logical part of my brain offered explanations. Local teenagers playing pranks, homeless people, a survivalist camp nearby. But the footprints didn't come from the forest. They simply existed in the clearing, as if whatever made them had materialized at the edge of the lodge and begun walking. And there was another problem. Where the footprints pressed closest to the lodge walls, the wood was marked, not damaged exactly, but touched. Smudges that looked like handprints, dozens of them at shoulder height, as if something had been running its palms along the exterior while it walked. I scrubbed them off with a rag. The marks came away easily, leaving no stain, but the act of removing them made me feel watched. I kept glancing toward the tree line, expecting to see someone standing there. No one was, but the feeling persisted. By noon, I'd convinced myself to stay one more night. Leaving felt like admitting defeat, like validating the family's irrational fear. I was 32 years old, broke and tired of running from vague warnings. If this place was dangerous, I needed to understand how and why. If it wasn't, I needed to prove everyone wrong. I spent the afternoon reinforcing that logic. I walked the clearing twice, confirming that the forest remained silent and empty. I checked the generator, the water pump, the propane tanks, all functional, all normal. I searched the lodge again for any documentation, journals, or anything that might explain the family's abandonment. Nothing. Whoever had removed the photographs and personal effects had been thorough. The lodge was a shell, maintained but hollowed out, scrubbed of identity. As the sun began setting, I made a decision. I would stay awake again. I would document whatever happened. I set up my phone to record audio, positioned a flashlight by the bed, and left the shutters cracked on one window just an inch, just enough to see out. If something was circling the lodge, I wanted to see it. Dusk came fast under the canopy. One moment there was dim gray light filtering through the trees. The next, complete darkness. The transition felt unnatural, like a switch being flipped. And with the darkness came the cold. I'm talking about a physical drop in temperature, at least 15 degrees in the span of minutes. My breath began fogging. I checked the thermostat. It read 72 degrees. I held my hand over the vent. Warm air was flowing, but the room felt glacial. I pulled on a jacket, turned on every light in the lodge, and waited. The footsteps started at 9:14 p.m. I know because I was staring at my phone when the first sound came, a soft, deliberate step on the porch directly in front of the door. Then another, and another. Circling left, moving along the front of the lodge toward the side. I stood up slowly, quietly, and moved to the window I'd left cracked. My hands were shaking. I pressed my face close to the gap and looked out. For a long moment I saw nothing. Just darkness and the vague shapes of trees. Then movement, not walking but swaying. Figures standing just at the edge of the clearing, rocking slightly side to side like people trying to stay warm. I counted 6 of them, maybe more. It was hard to tell because they stood in shadow, positioned perfectly between the distant trees and the lodge, where the light from the windows didn't quite reach. They weren't moving closer. They were just standing, watching. And then one of them spoke. "Hello?" A woman's voice, clear and friendly, like a neighbor calling from across a yard. "Is someone there? I think I'm lost." Every instinct screamed at me to respond, to call back, to help. But something in the tone was wrong. Too calm, too measured, like someone reading lines from a script. I didn't answer. The voice came again from a different direction now. Please, I've been walking for hours. I just need to use a phone. Still that same flat effect. Same cadence. And now I realized the voice hadn't moved naturally. It had jumped positions from the front of the lodge to the side without the sound of footsteps between. I backed away from the window. The whispers started next. The same overlapping murmur from the first night. But now I could pick out fragments. My name, repeated quietly. My father's name, my grandfather's. A litany of family names spoken too softly to sound threatening but loud enough to be undeniable. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it through the cracked window. The beam caught nothing. The figures I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, were gone. The clearing was empty, but the whispers continued unbothered by the light, circling the lodge in that same deliberate pattern. I stood there for 2 hours, listening, watching, documenting nothing because there was nothing visible to document. Just sound. Just presence. Around midnight, everything stopped, not gradually, abruptly, like a recording being paused. The whispers cut off mid-syllable, the footsteps ceased. The cold began to lift. I waited another hour, then finally allowed myself to sit down. I didn't sleep. I stared at the window until dawn, watching for movement that never came. When the sun rose, I went outside immediately. The footprints were back, a fresh layer on top of yesterday's, pressed even deeper now. But there was something new. Scratches on the front door. Long vertical gouges, 4 parallel lines dragged from the top of the door frame down to the handle. Not deep enough to splinter the wood, but deliberate, purposeful. I touched them carefully. The wood was smooth, almost polished, as if whatever made the marks had worn the grooves down through repetition. How many nights had this happened before I arrived? How long had this lodge been circled, tested, marked? I turned and looked at the tree line. The forest had changed. I'm certain of it. The trees were closer, not dramatically, not enough to be obvious, but enough that the clearing felt smaller, tighter. Pines that I remembered being 15 feet from the lodge perimeter now stood at 10. The gap was narrowing. I walked to the tree line slowly, stopping just before the boundary where the footprints always ended. I crouched down and examined the ground. The soil changed exactly at the edge of the clearing. On the lodge side, normal earth, soft and dark. On the forest side, harder, drier, pale, like 2 different ecosystems meeting at an invisible border. I picked up a stone and tossed it into the trees. It landed with a soft thud and disappeared into the underbrush. Normal. Expected. But the forest didn't react. No birds startled. No small animals are scattered. The stone's impact produced sound but no consequence, like throwing something into a photograph. I stepped back, unnerved, and returned to the lodge. I told myself I would stay 1 more night, just 1, to see if the pattern repeated, to gather more information. That's what I told myself. But the truth is simpler. I was already afraid to leave. Afraid that whatever was circling the lodge at night might follow me if I ran. Afraid that acknowledgement, leaving, fleeing, showing fear was exactly what it wanted. So I stayed. And that night, when the footsteps came again, I didn't look. I lay in bed, lights on, staring at the ceiling, listening to something patient and inexhaustible test the boundaries of my shelter, listening to it learn. My cousin Derek arrived on the 3rd morning, driving his truck too fast down the access road, country music blaring from open windows. I heard him coming from a 1/4 mile away. The first genuinely normal sound I'd experienced in 72 hours. He rolled up to the lodge with a cooler full of beer, hunting gear piled in the truck bed, and that aggressive good humor some men mistake for confidence. Derek was my age, worked construction downstate, and had apparently decided the family's warnings about the lodge were bullshit designed to keep prime hunting land locked up. His words, not mine. "Danny!" He climbed out of the truck grinning like we were meeting for a tailgate party instead of at the edge of something wrong. Heard you were squatting up here. Figured I'd come bag a buck, show everybody there's nothing to be afraid of. I wanted to tell him to leave. I wanted to explain the footprints, the voices, the way the forest pressed closer each night. But standing there in morning sunlight, with Derek's normalcy radiating like heat, all of it sounded insane. You shouldn't stay after dark, I said instead. He laughed. Come on, man, it's just woods. What, you buy into the ghost stories now? There are no ghost stories, I said. That's the problem. Nobody will explain what's actually wrong with this place. Because nothing's wrong with it. He hauled his gear onto the porch. It's free real estate in the middle of trophy whitetail territory. The family's just weird. I helped him unload mostly because I didn't know how else to respond. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted his certainty to be contagious, to override the dread that had been building in my chest. We spent the afternoon the way hunters do, scouting, setting up a rudimentary blind at the clearing's edge, talking about nothing important. Derek drank steadily, told stories about mutual relatives, and complained about his ex-wife. Aggressively normal behavior. But I noticed things he didn't. The way his voice seemed to carry too far in the silent forest, echoing slightly like we were speaking in an empty room. The way the trees he leaned against felt cold, even in the sunlight. The way no birds ever landed in the branches above us, no matter how long we sat still. Derek noticed none of it, or chose not to. You see any deer sign? He asked, examining the ground near the tree line. No, I said. No tracks at all in the woods, only in the clearing. Weird. Should be all over the place this time of year. He stood, brushing off his hands. Well, we'll get lucky tomorrow morning. I can feel it. As the sun set, he started a fire in the lodge's fireplace, talking about his hunting strategy, debating which rifle to use. I made dinner, chili from cans, and tried to act like everything was fine. But I was watching the windows, watching the light drain from the clearing, watching the moment when darkness would come and the circling would begin. Derek didn't notice. He was on his fourth beer, animated, happy to have an audience. You really stayed here alone? He asked. 2 nights. Yeah. And nothing happened? No spooky shit? I hesitated. Depends on what you'd consider spooky. Boo. Ghost appears, chains rattling, that kind of thing. No, not like that. Then what? I told him. About the footprints, the whispers, the scratches on the door, the cold. I kept my voice level, factual, just reporting events. He listened, expression shifting from amusement to something more serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You think someone's screwing with you? He finally asked. I think something's out there. Something or someone. Does it matter? He shrugged. Matters if we're calling the cops or loading the shotgun. Cell phones don't work out here, and I don't think a shotgun would help. Shotgun helps with everything, Danny. He stood, stretched. You're freaked out because you've been alone. 2 people, it'll be different. Whatever's happening, it's probably just teenagers or vagrants. They try anything tonight, we'll handle it. I didn't argue. There was no point. Derek had already decided what reality was, and my job was to wait for that reality to correct him. The footsteps started at 9:30. We were sitting in the main room, Derek cleaning his rifle, me pretending to read. The first soft impact on the porch froze us both. What the hell? Derek stood and walked to the window. Don't open the shutters, I said quickly. Why not? Just don't. But he already had, cracking them an inch to peer out. His face was pressed to the glass, breath fogging the pane. I don't see anything, he said. The footsteps continued, circling left. Slow and deliberate, exactly as they'd been the previous nights. Someone is walking around out there, Derek said, voice tight. I can hear it. I know. So let's go check it out. No. I stood. Derek, listen to me, don't go out there. Why the hell not? If it's people, we scare them off. If it's an animal, same thing. It's not people and it's not an animal. He looked at me, really looked, and for the first time I saw doubt in his expression. Not fear, not yet, but the first crack in his certainty. Then we both heard it. A woman's voice, clear and close, coming from the direction of the tree line. "Help! Please, somebody help me!" Derek's head snapped toward the sound. "Someone's hurt!" "No," I said. "They're not." "How the hell would you know?" "Because I heard the same voice 2 nights ago, same words, same tone." The voice came again, more urgent now. "Please, I'm lost. I think I'm hurt." Derek grabbed his flashlight off the table. "I'm going out there." I caught his arm. "Derek, stop. Think about this. Why would someone be crying for help in the middle of nowhere? How would they even get here? I don't know, but I'm not going to stand here while someone's... It's not someone." My voice was louder than I intended, almost a shout. "It's something trying to get you to leave the lodge. That's what it does. It calls, it pretends, and if you go out there, you won't come back." He stared at me, and I saw the moment he made his decision. Not based on logic or my warning, but on something deeper. Pride, masculinity, the inability to be seen as a coward. "I'll be fine," he said, pulling free. "You stay here if you want." He grabbed his rifle, checked the chamber, and walked to the door. I should have stopped him. Physically tackled him, locked the door, anything. But I didn't. Because part of me, God help me, part of me wanted to know what would happen. Wanted proof. Wanted validation that I wasn't losing my mind. Derek opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The woman's voice called out again, further away now from somewhere in the trees. "Please, over here." "I'm coming," Derek shouted. He turned on his flashlight and the beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the clearing and the trees beyond. Nothing was there. No woman. No movement. But the voice continued, receding deeper into the forest. "This way! Hurry!" Derek descended the porch steps and crossed the clearing. I stood in the doorway, heart hammering, watching his flashlight bob toward the tree line. He paused at the edge where the footprints always stopped. "Hello?" he called. "Where are you?" The voice didn't answer. The forest was silent. And then Derek stepped between the trees and the silence broke. I heard thrashing, branches snapping, Derek's voice raised in confusion. "What the hell? Where did..." And then the flashlight went spinning, and the beam caught something moving through the undergrowth. Something fast. Something wrong. "Danny!" Derek screamed. Just once. Loud enough that the sound should have echoed, should have carried. It didn't. It was absorbed by the trees, swallowed instantly like the forest ate sound itself. Then nothing. No more thrashing. No more screams. Just the beam of the flashlight, lying motionless on the forest floor, illuminates moss and dead leaves. I waited in the doorway, unable to move, staring at that single point of light. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 30. Time felt broken. The flashlight flickered, dimmed, went out, and the footsteps resumed circling the lodge, patient and methodical as if nothing had changed. I closed the door, locked it, and backed away. Derek didn't come back. At dawn, I forced myself to search. I crossed the clearing slowly, stopping at the exact spot where Derek had entered the trees. His boot prints were still visible, pressed deep into the soil, leading between 2 pines. I followed them for 10 feet. Then they vanished, not faded, not obscured, but simply stopped existing. Mid-stride, as if Derek had been lifted into the air. The flashlight was there, lying in the leaves where I'd seen it fall. I picked it up carefully. The casing was intact, with no visible damage. But when I tried the switch, nothing happened. I unscrewed the back. The batteries inside were corroded beyond recognition, swollen and split, leaking black. Residue. Not the kind of damage that happens from a fall. the kind that happens from years of decay. I searched for another hour, calling Derek's name, finding nothing. No blood, no torn clothing, no drag marks. Just his footprints leading into the forest, and then his absence. When I returned to the lodge, I found fresh scratches on the door, longer this time, deeper, gouged all the way through the stain into raw wood. 4 parallel lines, like something had been keeping tally. I spent hours sitting on the lodge floor, back against the wall, staring at Derek's rifle propped in the corner. He'd left it when he went outside, confident that a flashlight would be enough. The rifle remained useless, a monument to misplaced certainty. I should have called someone, should have hiked back to where cell service existed, reported Derek missing, brought police and search teams. That's what a rational person would do. But I knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic entirely, that Derek was gone in a way that no search team would understand. And more than that, leaving the lodge felt impossible. Not physically, but psychologically. Like stepping outside would mean accepting an invitation I'd been refusing for days. So instead, I searched. I tore through every room systematically, looking for something the family must have left behind. Instructions, warnings, explanations. They'd removed the photographs, stripped away the personal history, but this place had been used for generations. Someone at some point must have written something down. I searched the kitchen cupboards, finding only old dishes and mouse droppings. The bedrooms yielded nothing but furniture. The basement was small and damp, containing only the water heater and stacked firewood. That left the attic. I'd noticed the access panel on the second-floor ceiling during my first walk-through, but hadn't bothered investigating. Now I dragged a chair beneath it, stood on unsteady legs, and pushed the panel aside. Darkness and the smell of old insulation greeted me. I hauled myself up, using my phone's flashlight to illuminate the space. The attic was larger than expected, running the full length of the lodge. Exposed beams crossed overhead. Boxes were stacked along one wall. Christmas decorations, old tools, the accumulated debris of decades. But in the far corner, wedged behind a support beam where it would be easy to miss, I found something else. A metal lockbox, painted olive green, military surplus. Rusted at the corners, but intact. I carried it down carefully, hands shaking, and set it on the kitchen table. No lock. Just a simple latch, corroded enough that I had to work it free with a knife. When it finally opened, the hinges squealed. Inside, a weathered notebook wrapped in oilcloth like something precious or dangerous. Beneath it, several loose photographs, the ones that had been removed from the walls. And underneath those, yellowed newspaper clippings, edges crumbling. I unwrapped the notebook first. The cover was unmarked leather, water-stained and cracked. I opened it slowly. The first page, written in careful script, read simply, "Rules for staying." My throat went dry. The handwriting changed throughout the notebook. Different people, different eras, adding entries over decades. Some in pencil, others in ink. Dates ranged from 1952 to what looked like the late 1990s. Annotations crowded the margins, small, desperate notes squeezed between the original rules. The first entry was dated October 1952, written by my great-grandfather. If you must stay at the lodge after dark, observe the following without exception. 1. Never leave the lodge after sunset for any reason. If you find yourself outside when darkness comes, do not attempt to return. Walk to the road instead. Below this, in different handwriting, someone had scrawled, "James didn't listen. October 67, 3 days before we found him, walking in circles 6 miles south. Didn't remember leaving." 2. Do not respond to voices outside, regardless of what they say or who they claim to be. Do not answer questions. Do not acknowledge their presence in any way. Margin note, acknowledged once. It knew my daughter's name the next night, then my wife's, then things it shouldn't. No date, no signature. 3. Keep all windows shuttered after dark. If you must look outside, do so briefly and only through the smallest opening possible. Never make eye contact with anything you see. Annotation: made eye contact. November 74. It stood there until dawn, same face as mine. Robert H. 4. If you hear footsteps circling the lodge, remain still and quiet until they pass. Do not count them. Do not try to determine how many there are. Someone had underlined this heavily, then written, counted to 47 before I stopped. There wasn't 47 anything. There was 1. 5. Do not sleep facing the windows even if shuttered. Face the interior walls or ceiling only. No annotation on this one, just a date circled repeatedly, August 12th, 1981. 6. If something knocks on the door, do not respond. If something scratches, do not investigate. The structure will hold. Margin note: structure held. Door held. I didn't. MH June 88. The rules continued, growing more specific and more disturbing. Some were crossed out entirely with notes like wrong or made it worse slashed next to them. Others had been amended, refined through trial and terrible error. 7. Do not bring photographs of family members to the lodge. Do not keep personal items that carry strong associations. It will use them. 8. If the temperature drops suddenly, move to the interior room and wait. Do not attempt to warm the space. The cold will pass. 9. Never follow anything into the woods, no matter what it looks like, no matter what it promises. This rule had been underlined so hard that the pen had torn through the paper. Next to it, Thomas followed November 59, found his coat 2 years later, folded neatly on the porch. Nothing else. I kept reading, feeling sick. Each rule represented someone learning something terrible. Each annotation was evidence of failure, partial or complete. Halfway through the notebook, the entries changed tone, less instructional, more documentary. People describing what happened when rules were broken, what they'd seen, what they'd survived. A 1978 entry, shaky handwriting. It doesn't want to kill us, it wants us to join it. Karen said she felt invited when she heard the voices. Like something was offering her a choice. She said no, but it was hard. God help me, she said it was hard to refuse. A 1983 entry. The forest isn't natural. We had surveyors out before Dad died. They couldn't map it. Every measurement contradicted the last. Paths that should be straight curved. Distances that should be fixed changed. One surveyor went in with a team and came out alone. Said the others were still walking, but he couldn't find them even though he could hear their voices. A 1991 entry, my Uncle Mark's handwriting. I recognized it. We're not keeping the lodge to preserve it. We're keeping it to maintain the boundary. As long as the structure stands, as long as someone remembers the rules, it stays contained. If we abandon it completely, if it falls into ruin, I think the boundary fails. I think it spreads. The final entry was dated December 1997. My father's handwriting. We're removing all personal effects and ceasing overnight stays. The risk is too high, but we cannot sell. We cannot transfer ownership. We cannot let it become public property. Some prison cells don't need guards. They need to be forgotten while remaining locked. God forgive us for not burning it down when we had the chance. Below this, added later in pencil, almost illegible, can't burn it. Tried, fire won't take. MH 2003. I sat back, notebook trembling in my hands. They knew, all of them. For generations they knew. And they'd hidden this information, removed it from the lodge, made the place as anonymous as possible. Not to erase history, but to eliminate curiosity. Because a warning creates questions. Questions create research. Research creates presence. And presence was what it fed on. I turned to the last page, hoping for more, and found a single sentence written recently, the ink still dark. If you're reading this, you're already too late to leave safely. Follow the rules until dawn, every dawn. For as long as it takes, no signature, no date. But I recognized the handwriting. It was mine. I stared at those words, in my handwriting, in my specific letter formation, and felt reality tilt. I hadn't written that. I'd never seen this notebook before this moment, but the writing was unmistakably mine. I flipped back through the pages frantically, looking for other entries I might have made and forgotten. Nothing. Just that single sentence on the final page, in fresh ink. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening. I had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. I grabbed the notebook and moved to the interior bedroom, the one with no windows, following a rule I now understood. I dragged the mattress off the bed and positioned it against the far wall, facing away from the door. Then I sat down to wait for nightfall. Rules clutched in my hands, finally understanding what my family had been protecting me from. Not the truth. The choice. The fourth night was the worst so far, but not because anything attacked. It was worse because I could hear intelligence in the patterns now. Purpose. The footsteps didn't just circle. They paused at specific points, testing different sections of the wall, learning the structure's geography. The whispers weren't random. They were conversational, responding to my movements inside even though I made no sound. When I shifted position, the whispers shifted focus. When I held my breath, they grew quieter, as if listening. When my stomach growled near midnight, something outside laughed, not cruelly but with recognition, like a friend, sharing a private joke. It was learning me, and I was learning it, which felt like the worst crime. I made it to dawn by reciting rules to myself, reading and rereading the notebook by flashlight, using the annotations as a lifeline to sanity. Other people had survived this. Other people had sat in this lodge, experiencing this same impossible night, and lived to write warnings. I could survive too. I just had to follow the rules. When sunlight finally broke through the gaps in the shutters, I allowed myself to move. My body ached from sitting rigid for hours. My mind felt scraped hollow. I opened the shutters cautiously, expecting to see the forest pressed even closer. The clearing shrunken further. Instead, I saw a man standing at the edge of the tree line. Elderly, maybe 70, wearing a faded canvas jacket and work boots. He stood perfectly still, hands in his pockets, staring at the lodge with an expression I couldn't read from this distance. I watched him through the window for several minutes. He didn't move, didn't wave. Just stood there, positioned exactly at the boundary where the clearing met the forest. Finally, I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. "You shouldn't be here," I called out. "Neither should you," he replied. His voice carried clearly across the clearing, too clearly without the natural degradation of distance. "But here we are. Who are you?" "Someone who made your mistakes 40 years ago." He shifted his weight but didn't step closer. "Found the notebook, I see. Took you long enough. You know about it?" "I wrote some of it. November 1978 through March 1982. He tilted his head slightly. "You read those entries?" I had. They were among the most detailed and most disturbing. Technical observations about the forest's properties, careful documentation of sounds and patterns, and a growing sense of resigned dread that permeated every word. "You were a caretaker?" I asked. "Tried to be. Your grandfather hired me after he couldn't find a family willing to stay. Paid well and I needed the money. Thought I could handle it." He smiled without humor. "I was wrong. But I learned to adapt." "How long did you stay?" 4 years, off and on. Never more than a week at a time. Eventually, I couldn't leave even that long. Started to feel it pulling at me when I was in town, calling me back. So I built a cabin. He gestured vaguely east. 2 miles that way outside the boundary. Close enough to watch, far enough to sleep. You've been watching the lodge all this time. Someone has to. Your family stopped coming, stopped maintaining the bargain. I've been patching the balance ever since. What bargain? I descended the porch steps slowly. What is this place? Don't. His voice went sharp. Don't come closer, and don't ask questions that make it seem like you're interested in staying. I stopped walking. I'm not interested in staying. I want to leave. Then why are you still here? It was a good question. I'd had 4 days to drive away. Nothing had physically prevented my departure during daylight hours. Derek's truck still sat in the clearing, keys probably in the ignition. I could leave right now. But I didn't, couldn't, and I didn't fully understand why. Your cousin, the old man said quietly. He went into the woods. Yes. Following a voice. Yes. Then he's part of it now. Not dead, it doesn't kill, but not alive in any way that matters. He pulled a hand from his pocket, revealing something small and white. It does this. He tossed the object toward me. It landed in the grass halfway between us. A tooth, human molar, root intact. Found that on the porch in 1980, he continued. The day after, my partner went into the woods to investigate a sound. Found another tooth the next week, then a finger bone, then a piece of jawbone. Took 6 months, but eventually I recovered most of him, one piece at a time, left at the door like offerings. My stomach turned. You're saying it? I'm saying it doesn't hunt bodies. It hunts attention, recognition. It wants you to look, to listen, to acknowledge. That's the food. That's what it metabolizes. He paused. Your cousin fed it by responding. By entering the woods, he accepted the invitation. Now he's fuel. For what? For expansion, for persistence, for whatever the hell this thing is. He looked past me at the lodge, expression hardening. The structure was built as a boundary marker by people who understood this forest better than we do. Not to keep us out, to keep IT in. As long as the lodge stands and someone remembers the rules, the boundary holds. The forest stays contained to this immediate area. And if the lodge falls, then the boundary fails and this spreads. Slowly at first, then faster. More forest, more whispers, more circling. Larger territory to hunt from. He met my eyes. That's why your family couldn't sell. Couldn't let it become public. Can you imagine what would happen if this became a state park, a development? If hundreds of people start camping here, hearing voices, following sounds? I could imagine it. Too easily. So what do? I asked. Follow the rules, survive until dawn, every night, for as long as you can. And then you pass it on as I did, like your grandfather did, like everyone who stayed here eventually does. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. It knows you're alone now. Your cousin's gone. I'm not coming inside. You're the only presence left. Why does that matter? Because when it knows you're alone, it stops pretending to be multiple things. It consolidates, becomes direct. He glanced back at me. Tonight will be different, worse. But if you follow the rules exactly, you'll survive. You just won't enjoy it. Wait, I started forward. Don't follow me, he said sharply. And don't come looking for my cabin. The boundary around it is thinner. You'd be outside the lodge's protection. He walked into the forest without hesitation, stepping between the trees and disappearing within seconds. Swallowed by shadows that seemed too dark for morning light. I stood alone in the clearing, staring at the tooth lying in the grass. I didn't pick it up. That evening I followed every rule meticulously. I shuttered every window before sunset. I moved to the interior room and positioned the mattress facing the wall. I kept the lights on but dimmed. I held the notebook open, reading and rereading the entries, using them as anchors. The footsteps came early, starting before full dark. But the old man was right. They were different now. Not many sets of feet, but one. Slow, deliberate pacing of the perimeter with the patience of something that understood time differently than I did. And when the voice came, it wasn't Derek's or a stranger's. It was mine. "Let me in," my voice said from outside. "I'm cold." I bit down on my knuckle to keep from responding. "I know you're afraid," my voice continued. "But it's safe now. I figured it out. I have the rules. You don't have to stay in there alone." The tone was perfect. My inflection, my casual speech pattern, even the slight hoarseness I developed when tired. If I'd been outside listening to that voice through a door, I would have sworn it was me calling. "Please," my voice said. "I don't want to stay out here all night." I closed my eyes, focusing on my breathing, on the rules, on anything except that voice. Hours passed. My voice pleaded, reasoned, grew frustrated, then calm again, cycling through every emotional register. It told me about my childhood in perfect detail. It recited conversations I'd had with Derek. It knew my mother's middle name, my father's birthday, and the name of my first dog. It knew me completely, and sometime after midnight it said something that nearly broke me. "I know you're reading the notebook. I know you saw the last entry. You understand now, don't you? You were always meant to stay. This is where you belong." I opened my eyes and looked at the notebook's final page. "If you're reading this, you're already too late to leave safely." In my handwriting. Undeniably mine. "You'll write it," my voice said softly. "When this night is over, you'll write it because you'll understand. This place needs a witness, a guardian, a tenant, and you're already chosen." I wanted to scream that I wasn't chosen, that this was random, that I could still leave. But the words felt hollow, even unspoken, because I was still here. And part of me had already accepted that I might never leave. Dawn came eventually, as it always does. The voice stopped mid-sentence, cut off like a recording. The footsteps ceased. I waited another hour before emerging from the interior room. The lodge was silent, undamaged, exactly as I'd left it. But when I opened the notebook to reassure myself, I found a new entry on the final page. Fresh ink, my handwriting, dated today. It read, "Night 4 survived. It knows my voice. Now." It knows me. But I'm still here, still following the rules. That has to count for something. I didn't remember writing it, but I recognized the truth in the words. I was beginning to understand that surviving and escaping were not the same thing. For 3 more nights, I existed in a state between prisoner and volunteer, following the rules with mechanical precision, watching myself change in small ways I couldn't prevent. I started speaking to myself in third person when reviewing the rules, as if the person following them and the person observing that behavior were separate entities. I began to anticipate the nightly circling, listening for the first footstep with something closer to recognition than fear. The notebook was filled with entries I didn't remember making, observations, updates, refinements to the rules, all in my handwriting, all technically accurate, all describing experiences I must have had but couldn't consciously recall. On the 7th night, I found myself writing a new rule without thinking. 7b. Do not try to remember the full night in the morning. Let the gaps exist. Some memories are not meant to be retrieved. I stared at those words for a long time, wondering what I was protecting myself from knowing. But the real crisis came on the 8th night. I'd settled into the routine by then. Shutters closed, interior room prepared, lights positioned according to patterns I'd apparently optimized during the nights I couldn't remember. I was reading the notebook by flashlight, waiting for the familiar sound of circling footsteps, when instead I heard something different. Knocking. Not scratching or testing, but actual knocking. Polite measured 3 slow impacts on the front door. Then Derek's voice, "Danny, you in there?" My blood went cold. "Come on, man, I know you're pissed at me. I shouldn't have gone into the woods, but I'm back now. I'm okay. Can you please let me in?" I sat frozen, hand clenched around the notebook. Rule 2. Do not respond to voices outside regardless of what they say or who they claim to be. "I'm freezing, Danny, please. I've been walking for days trying to find my way back. The door's locked. I can see the lights on. I know you're there." The voice was perfect. Not theatrical or obviously wrong like my own voice had been nights ago. This sounded exactly like Derek. Exhausted, frustrated, genuinely cold. "I found something out there," Derek's voice continued. "Something important. I understand now why the family avoids this place. You were right. You were completely right. But I need to get inside to explain." I checked the notebook frantically, scanning for guidance. Rule 9. If something claims to have information or understanding, do not engage. Truth offered by the forest is poisoned by the cost of hearing it. I'd written that rule 2 nights ago, apparently. I didn't remember the experience that prompted it. The knocking came again, harder now. "Danny, seriously, stop screwing around. It's me. It's really me. You want me to tell you something only I would know? I'll prove it's me." And then Derek's voice began reciting details. Childhood stories, private family jokes, the exact conversation we'd had before he went outside. Perfect recall, perfect cadence. I felt my resolve beginning to crack. What if it was Derek? What if he'd somehow survived, managed to escape whatever took him, and I was refusing to help because of paranoid rules written by frightened people decades ago? "Please," Derek's voice said, and I heard emotion break through. Genuine fear, genuine desperation. "Please, Danny, don't leave me out here. You're family." My hand moved toward the door. I caught myself inches from the lock, shocked that I'd crossed the room without conscious decision. I backed away quickly, heart hammering. "That's it?" Derek's voice had changed slightly, less pleading, more curious. "You're really not going to open it, even for me?" I didn't respond, couldn't respond. My throat had locked. Interesting. The voice had lost its desperation entirely now, replaced by something clinical, analytical. "You followed the rule, even when I was perfect, even when I gave you every reason to doubt." The temperature plummeted. My breath fogged so densely I could barely see. "I've been practicing, you know," the Derek voice continued. "Every night learning your responses, learning which emotional levers work, which memories resonate. You're very consistent. It makes you predictable." Something scraped along the door. Not claws or nails, but something harder, methodical. The sound of measuring, calculating. "But you have an inconsistency," the voice said thoughtfully. "A weakness. Would you like to know what it is?" I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voice didn't come from outside anymore. It came from inside my head, resonant and clear. Guilt. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall. "You feel guilty about Derek, about not stopping him, about wanting to see what would happen when he went outside." The voice was gentle now, understanding. "You're reading the notebook, following the rules, playing survivor, but you wanted this. You wanted to be alone with the mystery. You wanted to stop pretending everything was normal." Tears were streaming down my face. I couldn't tell if they were from fear or recognition. "The lodge isn't a prison, Danny. It's an opportunity. Everyone who stayed here, everyone who survived, they all made the same choice eventually. They stopped fighting and started learning. They became witnesses, guardians, participants." The scratching on the door grew faster, more urgent, like something writing. "You're already writing in the notebook, already adding rules, already optimizing the space for survival. You're adapting beautifully." I looked down and realized I was holding a pen. The notebook was open to a blank page. I'd been writing without realizing it, filling the margins with observations. A temperature drop indicates direct attention. Voice modulation sophisticated. Guilt manipulation effective. Must reinforce interior boundaries. My handwriting, my analysis, written automatically while the voice spoke. "See?" the voice said, pleased. "You understand. You're already part of the process." The scratching stopped. Silence descended, heavy and expectant, then carved into the door in letters I could see even from across the room, glowing faintly in the darkness. "If it sounds human, it isn't." The same rule from the notebook, now written on the door. Confirmation and threat merged into one statement. I sank to the floor, notebook clutched to my chest, understanding finally breaking over me like cold water. It wasn't trying to kill me, it wasn't trying to drive me away, it was trying to convert me, to transform me from a person trapped in the lodge into a person who chose to stay, from prisoner to priest. And it was working. Because despite the terror, despite the manipulation, despite everything, I was still here. And part of me, growing larger each night, didn't want to leave, wanted to understand. Wanted to stay and learn and witness and become whatever the lodge needed me to become. The rest of the night passed without incident. No more voices, no more scratching, just silence, like a test completed, a lesson delivered. When dawn came, I checked the door. The carved words were gone. The wood was smooth, unmarked, as if nothing had touched it. But I remembered. And in the notebook, a new entry appeared. Night 8. It offered a partnership. I refused. But the offer remains. Every night it remains. I closed the notebook and looked around the lodge. At the shuttered windows I now knew how to position. At the interior room I'd optimized. At the supplies I'd unconsciously begun stockpiling for longer-term survival. I was building a life here. Not consciously, but systematically, like someone who expected to stay. And the worst part was, I couldn't tell if it was being done to me, or if I was doing it to myself. On the 9th night, the forest stopped pretending. I'd learned to recognize the preliminary signs. The way afternoon shadows lengthened too quickly. The way birds that didn't exist during the day somehow fell silent at dusk. The particular quality of air pressure that preceded darkness. By now I could feel the transition coming 30 minutes in advance and could prepare myself mentally for the nightly siege. But this night was different from the moment the sun touched the horizon. The trees moved, not swaying, moving. Sliding closer with glacial deliberation, branches extending toward the clearing like reaching fingers. I stood at the window and watched it happen in real time, the forest perimeter contracting by inches, then feet, the space between lodge and woodland shrinking visibly. I checked the notebook frantically, looking for rules about this specific scenario. Nothing, or rather nothing explicit, but in the margins of a 1985 entry someone had written. When it stops being subtle, you're near the end of its patience. The footsteps began while the sun was still visible. That had never happened before. The circling always waited for complete darkness, following some invisible protocol. Now, in the last red light of day, I heard dozens of footfalls converging on the lodge, not circling, approaching, from every direction simultaneously. I backed away from the windows, grabbed the notebook and my flashlight, and moved to the interior room. I'd reinforced it over the past days, dragging a heavy dresser against the door, positioning supplies within arm's reach, creating a makeshift bunker. I sealed myself inside and waited. The footsteps didn't stop at the walls this time. They climbed. I heard them ascending the exterior, impossibly defying physics. Soft impacts moving up the lodge's wooden siding across the roof, multiplying until it sounded like rain made of footsteps. Then the whispers started, but not outside anymore. Inside, emerging from the walls themselves, from the floorboards, from the ceiling. Dozens of voices speaking over each other, creating a layered drone of sound that I couldn't block out. My name, repeated endlessly. Questions are asked and answered simultaneously. Fragments of conversation I'd had years ago played back imperfectly. The sound built in volume and complexity until it felt like the lodge itself was speaking, every board and beam vibrating with voice. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't entering through my ears, it was materializing inside my head, bypassing the auditory system entirely. Join us, join us, join us, become part, become witness, become home, become... The door to the interior room rattled despite the dresser. Not from impact, but from expansion. The wood was swelling, growing, the frame distorting like something organic. I opened the notebook desperately, flipping through pages, looking for anything. That explained this escalation. Near the back, I found an entry I'd somehow missed before. May 1979. The lodge isn't separate from the forest. They're the same thing. The structure was grown, not built, shaped into a form that human understanding could accept. The boundary isn't about keeping the forest out, it's about keeping us in, defining a space where we can exist without fully merging. Below that, in different handwriting, it's not protecting us, it's digesting us slowly. The walls began to breathe. I don't mean metaphorically. The wooden panels expanded and contracted in rhythm like lungs, like the entire lodge was a living organism and I was inside its chest cavity. The breathing accelerated, grew more labored, and the temperature spiked, not cold now, but hot, humid, like being inside a mouth. Through the breathing, through the whispers, I heard something else. Screaming. Distant, muffled, coming from below. From beneath the lodge. I pressed my ear to the floor. The screaming grew clearer. Not one voice, but many. Dozens, maybe hundreds. A chorus of people crying out, not in pain but in warning, trying to communicate something urgent through layers of earth and wood and time. They were saying the same thing, over and over. Don't forget, don't forget, don't forget. Don't forget what? I scrambled for the notebook, reading faster now, no longer searching for rules but for context, for the foundation beneath the warnings. Near the beginning, in my great-grandfather's original handwriting, the indigenous people who lived here before settlement called this place Bawasinai. Echo, or it reflects. They wouldn't hunt here, wouldn't even speak its name directly. They said the forest remembered everything that entered and eventually made copies, imperfect reflections that couldn't leave. We built the lodge anyway. We needed the hunting ground. We thought we could control it by defining space, by creating a structure. We were wrong. The structure became part of it. The boundary became a trap for us instead of it. Another entry, 1967. We can't destroy the lodge. We can't abandon it. Either action breaks the container and the reflections escape. They'd spread, imperfect copies of everyone who ever stayed here, walking out of the forest into the world. We have to maintain it. Have to keep someone here to prove the originals still exist, so the copies remain incomplete. I understood suddenly, sickeningly. The lodge wasn't protected. It was a jail. And I wasn't the prisoner. I was the guard, or becoming one. Every person who'd stayed here, everyone who'd survived, had become part of the structure's defense system. Living anchors keep the copied versions contained. The voices beneath the floor were previous guardians. The ones who'd stayed too long merged too completely, become part of the foundation. They were trying to warn me, don't forget you're real. Don't forget you're the original. Don't let it convince you you're the reflection. The breathing walls shuddered. The whispers coalesced into a single voice. Not Derek's, not mine, but something older, more fundamental. You are the guardian now. You accepted the role when you stayed. When you choose to survive instead of flee. The lodge recognizes you. The interior room door burst open despite the dresser. Not violently. It simply ceased to be blocked, the furniture moving aside on its own, granting passage. Beyond the doorway, the lodge had changed. The familiar rooms were gone. In their place, forest. Not outside the building, but replacing it, the interior filled with trees and undergrowth and darkness. The walls were still visible, but they'd become transparent, permeable, boundaries existing more as suggestion than substance. And between the trees, standing motionless, I saw them. The copies. Derek, face slack and empty, was wearing the same clothes he'd disappeared in. The old caretaker, decades younger, stared with hollow eyes. People I didn't recognize, dressed in clothing from different eras. And there, near the back, barely visible, a figure that looked like me, not moving, just standing, waiting. They all stood at attention, facing inward, forming a perimeter around a central clearing where the lodge's foundation should be. "These are everyone who came before," the voice explained. "Everyone who stayed, everyone who understood. They maintain the boundary from within. They keep the reflections contained. They remember themselves so the copies remain powerless. You will join them. Not yet, but eventually. When your memory of yourself begins to fade, when you can no longer distinguish original from echo, you will step outside and take your place in the circle. This is the purpose. This is the price. This is why the lodge exists." I wanted to scream, to run, to reject everything being shown to me. But my body wouldn't move. I was frozen, watching, witnessing, as I'd been meant to do from the beginning. The figure that looked like me turned its head slightly. Our eyes met. It smiled, not threateningly, but with recognition, with inevitability. Then dawn broke. Instantly, the forest interior vanished. The walls became solid again. The interior room returned to normal dimensions. The dresser stood where I'd originally positioned it, as if it had never moved. I collapsed, gasping, drenched in sweat, but I could still hear them. Faintly beneath the floorboards, the voices continued their mantra. "Don't forget. Don't forget. Don't forget." I crawled to the notebook and found a new entry, pages filled with writing I didn't remember producing. Night 9. Saw the truth. The lodge is a living archive of containment. We don't guard it from the forest, we guard the world from what the forest has already copied. Every person who stays becomes part of the barrier. This is generational, this is permanent, this is the price of our family's presence here. I understand now why they didn't warn me. Warning creates context. Context creates preparation. Preparation creates resistance. They needed me to stumble into this naturally, to make choices that felt like mine, so I'd accept the role when it was revealed. I'm not a prisoner, I'm a volunteer who didn't know I was volunteering. And now that I know, I can't leave. Because if I abandon the post, if I break the chain, the boundary fails. And everything in that circle, all those copies, all those echoes, walks free. I stared at those words written in my handwriting, expressing thoughts I had definitely had but couldn't remember thinking. I was changing. Faster now. The lodge wasn't asking for my service anymore. It was assuming it. Outside, morning sun illuminated a clearing that had shrunk by another 5 feet. The trees were closer, always closer. And somewhere in the forest, my reflection waited for me to forget which one of us was real. I tried to leave on the morning of day 10. I packed methodically, essentials in a backpack, Derek's truck keys. In my pocket, the notebook tucked under my arm because leaving it felt like abandoning evidence. I walked outside with forced calm, crossed the clearing without looking at the tree line, and climbed into the truck. The engine started immediately. Reliable machinery, normal physics, controllable variables. I put it in drive and followed the dirt access road away from the lodge, watching it shrink in the rearview mirror. 20 minutes of driving. Trees are passing on both sides. The road should have reached the main highway by now. Instead, I came around a curve and saw the lodge directly ahead. I stopped the truck, checked my odometer. I'd driven 8.3 miles. The access road was only 2 miles long. I reversed, turned around, and drove in the opposite direction. 15 minutes later, the lodge, appearing from around a different curve but unmistakably the same building. I tried 4 more times. Different speeds, different routes where the road branched. Every attempt ended the same way. The lodge, waiting, inevitable. On the 6th attempt, I pulled over and started walking. If the road were compromised, I'd cut through the forest, navigate by compass, trust geography over impossible looping. I stepped between the trees, pushed through the undergrowth, and walked in what I was certain was a straight line away from the property. 3 hours later, I emerged from the tree line into the lodge clearing, approaching it from a different angle, but undeniably back where I started. The forest had folded around me, or I'd never left, or leaving had become a concept without physical meaning. I stood in the clearing, staring at the lodge, and understood I wasn't locked in. I was fundamentally part of this place now. The boundary didn't just restrict my movement, it had absorbed me into its geography. I existed in relation to the lodge. Leaving required permission I didn't have and couldn't earn. Inside, I found the notebook open to a new entry. Day 10. Attempted departure. Failed as expected. The guardian bond is complete. Physical distance from the lodge is no longer possible. Must accept the role fully or risk dissolution of the boundary through neglect. Time to stop resisting and start learning. That night, I didn't hide in the interior room. I sat in the main room, lights on, notebook open, and waited for the circling to begin. It started punctually at sunset. Footsteps, whispers, the familiar rhythm. But I didn't hide. I listened, and for the first time I tried to hear patterns instead of threats. The whispers weren't random. They were communications, fragments of recorded information, pieces of memory, data stored in wood and soil and air. Not trying to hurt me, but trying to integrate me, to teach me the archive's contents. I heard my great-grandfather's voice explaining how he'd chosen the lodge site, unknowingly building directly over a place where the forest had folded inward decades earlier. I heard conversations between family members, discussing the first disappearances, the first rules, the dawning realization that they'd created a permanent obligation. I heard Derek, not the version that had knocked on the door, but the real Derek's last conscious thoughts as the forest copied him. Confusion, fear, then a strange calm as he understood he was being preserved, not destroyed. The copies weren't evil. They were archives. Incomplete recordings of everyone who'd entered the forest, stored in living wood, maintained by the boundary, were prevented from interacting with the outside world, where they might disrupt or replace their originals. The lodge was a library, and the guardians were librarians. I opened the notebook and began writing, not from compulsion this time, but from understanding. The price of our family's hunting on this land was stewardship of what the land hunted in return. Our reflections, our echoes, our memorized selves. We created the problem by introducing so many people to a place that collected them. Now we maintain the solution by staying, by being present, by proving the originals still exist so the copies remain dormant. This isn't punishment, it's a responsibility. I'm not trapped, I'm employed. Days passed, then weeks, then longer. I stopped counting. The routine became natural. Follow the rules at night, maintain the lodge during the day, listen to the whispers and organize what I heard. Add entries to the notebook documenting new patterns and observations. I was becoming what my father, my grandfather, all of them had feared I'd become. The next caretaker, the next witness, the next permanent resident. My family didn't call, didn't check on me. They knew. They'd always known how this ended. That's why they'd removed the warnings, because anyone who stayed long enough to need warnings had already stayed too long to leave. Sometimes I saw the old man at the tree line watching from a distance. We never spoke again. We didn't need to. He'd survived by maintaining proximity without commitment, by building a cabin just outside the boundary and serving part-time. But his way was ending. He was too old now, too tired. The lodge needed a full-time guardian. It had chosen me, or I'd chosen it. The distinction had stopped mattering. One morning I woke to find I couldn't remember my mother's face. Not clearly. I knew the facts, her hair color, her height, but the specific features had blurred. I checked my phone, but the photos wouldn't load. No signal, no data, no connection to anything outside. It was starting. The gradual erosion of external attachments, the slow removal of everything that anchored me to a life beyond the lodge. Soon I wouldn't remember enough of the outside world to miss it. I'd become what Derek had become, a reflection that still moved, still thought, but no longer knew what it was reflecting. The notebook had grown considerably, hundreds of pages of observations, rules, and warnings, all in my handwriting. I added a new entry. To whoever finds this next, I stayed because I thought I could understand it. Then I stayed because I thought I was helping. Now I stay because leaving has become linguistically meaningless. There is no away from here, no outside, only degrees of proximity to the boundary. You're probably reading this because you made the same choices I did. Curiosity, desperation, defiance. I'm sorry, but also, welcome. The rules work. Follow them. The lodge will keep you safe from the copies as long as you keep the copies safe from the world. This is the bargain. This is the purpose. Don't forget you're the original. That's the only rule that matters. That night, sitting in the main room listening to the familiar circling, I heard a new sound. A car approaching on the access road. I walked to the window and looked out. A sedan pulled into the clearing. A young woman climbed out, looking around with confused recognition. She approached the lodge slowly, studying it like she half remembered, being here before. Family. Had to be. In the same way I'd looked at this place on arrival. She saw me through the window and waved uncertainly. I had a choice. I could warn her. Tell her to leave immediately, to drive away and never come back. Or I could let her make her own discoveries, her own choices, follow the same path I had. Warning creates curiosity. Curiosity creates presence. Presence creates guardianship. The cycle perpetuates itself. I opened the door but didn't step out. You're probably looking for somewhere to stay, I said. There are rules you need to follow. Important ones. She approached the porch cautiously. Rules? If you're staying after dark, I held up the notebook. They're all written down. Are you Danny? I'm Emily, your cousin Sarah's daughter. The family said you'd been up here for a while, and you thought you'd check on me, I finished. And probably stay a night or two, free lodging. She nodded, looking embarrassed. Is that okay? Behind her, the sun was setting. The trees were shifting into their nightly configuration. The boundary was preparing to activate. I had maybe 10 minutes to turn her away, to warn her effectively, to break the cycle. Instead, I heard myself say, "It's fine, come inside, I'll explain everything." She smiled, relieved, and crossed the threshold. I closed the door behind her and listened to the first footsteps begin their nightly circuit. The lodge had its new candidate, and I had become what I'd feared, the one who passes on the curse by helping people survive it. In the notebook, a final entry appeared, not in my handwriting this time, but in Emily's, dated 3 weeks from now. Found Danny's notes, found the rules, tried to leave, but came back. He says it's temporary, that I can go once I understand. I think he's lying. I think he's forgotten that leaving was ever possible. I think I'm becoming the next guardian. I think this is how it always happens. I set the notebook down and looked at Emily, cheerfully unpacking her bag, asking questions about the generator and the water pump. Normal questions. Innocent questions. She'd find the answers herself soon enough. We all do. The forest remembers. The copies wait. The guardians serve. And the lodge, patient and permanent, continues its purpose. Containing what we released when we built on land that was never meant to be claimed. Some prisons don't need guards. They need to be forgotten while remaining locked. But we can't forget, that's the cruelest part. We have to remember exactly what we're guarding, why we can't leave, and what happens if we fail. We have to remember ourselves. Until eventually we don't. And then we step outside and take our place in the circle, and the lodge waits for the next guardian to arrive. The boundary holds. It always holds. As long as someone stays. Note discovered in the lodge attic, undated, author unknown. If you're reading this, you've already stayed too long. The fact that you found this notebook means you were meant to. The lodge brought you here. The forest selected you. Your family, knowingly or not, offered you. There is no escape clause, no loophole, no secret rule that frees you. There is only survival and service, and the slow certainty that you were never the protagonist of this story. You were always the next chapter. Welcome home, Guardian. Your shift has begun.